The night had always been colder than the day, but tonight it felt like the streets themselves were freezing over. The pavement beneath Alex's feet was rough, unforgiving, and every step he took echoed in the silence of the alley. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his body, his breath visible in the frigid air. His stomach growled, a painful reminder of the long hours since he had last eaten. He wasn't alone, though. A few feet away, Layla huddled in a corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face buried in the crook of her elbows. Her clothes were ragged, the fabric thin, hardly enough to shield her from the biting wind. Her long brown hair, tangled and wild, hung loosely around her face, but it didn't hide the fear in her eyes. She wasn't used to this, not like Alex. Alex glanced back at her, but he didn't say anything. There was no point in talking anymore. Words didn't fix things. Not out here, not in the streets. The only thing that mattered was surviving another night. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. They were distant, but getting closer. Alex's heart began to race, and he instinctively pulled Layla closer to him, wrapping his arms around her protective. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with a worn-out coat and a scruffy beard. He looked around, his eyes scanning the alley before they settled on Alex and Layla. Alex didn't know him, but the man's eyes were sharp, calculating. Alex tensed, every muscle in his body ready to flee if he had to. "You kids got anything to eat?" The man's voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. Layla stiffened, and Alex could see her fingers clenching into fists. There was no food, of course. No money, either. Nothing to offer. But Alex wasn't about to admit that to this stranger. "We don't have anything," Alex said, trying to sound firm, though his voice wavered slightly. The man grunted, taking a slow step forward. "You should be more careful then. People don't take kindly to beggars around here." Alex's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. He wasn't going to let this man intimidate them. Not again. They dealt with enough of that already. The man paused, sizing them up. There was a long, tense silence before he spoke again, this time softer, almost regretful. "You're better off finding a shelter, kid. The streets aren't safe." Not tonight. Alex didn't trust him, but the mention of shelter made his stomach twist with longing. They hadn't slept indoors for weeks. They'd been out here in the cold with nothing but the stars above to keep them company. "We'll be fine," Alex replied, his voice stronger now, even though the doubt gnawed at him. "We don't need help." The man gave him a look, then turned and walked away, disappearing back into the darkness from which he had come. The sound of his footsteps faded, but the tension lingered. Layla looked up at Alex, her face pale. "Do you think he'll come back?" "I don't know," Alex said, but the truth was, he was more worried about the cold than about the man. He could handle that. It was the cold that always had a way of creeping into your bones, making everything feel unbearable. Layla's hand found his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something comforting in that simple touch, something that told Alex, despite everything, that they weren't completely alone. "We'll make it through," Alex said, his voice low but determined. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when, but he would do whatever it took to keep both safe. In the distance, the sound of sirens wailed, signaling the beginning of another night on the streets. It was a harsh world, but Alex refused to let it break him. He wouldn't let it break Layla either. With one last glance down the alley, he pulled her along, heading toward the unknown. They would survive, even if it meant facing the darkness together, one step at a time. The next morning came with a gray, overcast sky that seemed to press down on the city, suffocating any hope of warmth. Alex and Layla had found a small corner behind a broken-down bus stop to rest, a place to shield themselves from the cold wind that never seemed to relent. Alex had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of how to get food, how to stay warm, how to survive. Layla was curled up beside him, her body trembling, though she tried her best to hide it. Her eyes fluttered open as the sounds of the city stirred around them, cars honking, people shouting, and the distant hum of a world that seemed to keep moving without noticing them. "I'm hungry," Layla whispered, her voice weak. Alex swallowed hard. He was hungry too, but he couldn't afford to show it. Not when Layla was looking at him with those wide, trusting eyes. He had to be strong for her. "I know," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the streets. He glanced around, spotting a man nearby selling hot dogs from a cart. The smell of sizzling meat wafted toward them, and Alex's stomach growled in response. He had no money, but he couldn't just sit there and watch Layla suffer. He stood up slowly, offering her a forced smile. "I'll be right back," he said, trying to sound confident. Layla didn't argue. She just nodded, though her expression was full of worry. As Alex walked toward the cart, his mind raced with options. He had no idea how he was going to get food, but desperation had a way of making you think of things you never would have considered before. When he reached the hot dog vendor, the man looked up, noticing the ragged clothes and dirt that covered Alex's face. "You got any money, kid?" the vendor asked, his tone dismissive. Alex paused. He had nothing to offer but empty hands. "I don't, but please, I'm just trying to get something for my sister. She's hungry." The vendor stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he sighed, shaking his head. "Listen, kid," he said, "I can't just give away food for free. You understand, right?" Alex felt a lump rise in his throat. He understood, but that didn't make it any easier. He had grown used to hearing no, but it didn't stop the sting each time. But just as Alex was about to turn and walk away, the vendor's eyes softened. "Tell you what," the man said quietly, his gaze darting to the other side of the street where a group of people stood. "You help me out with something, and I'll give you something to eat." Alex's heart skipped. "What do you need?" The vendor glanced over his shoulder, checking if anyone was watching. Then he lowered his voice to a near whisper. "I need you to keep an eye on that guy across the street. He's been asking for trouble. If he makes a move toward my cart, I'll need someone to warn me." Alex nodded quickly, barely thinking. "I'll do it. Just please. My sister is starving." The vendor handed him a hot dog, wrapped in a paper napkin. It wasn't much, but it was something. As Alex grabbed it, the man gave him a knowing look. "Thanks, kid," the vendor said. "You've got a good heart. Just keep an eye out." With the food in his hands, Alex rushed back to Layla, his heart pounding. When he reached their corner, he found her sitting up, looking exhausted but alert. "Here," Alex said, kneeling beside her. He handed her the hot dog, his fingers trembling. Layla took it with a grateful smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "You didn't have to do that. I can go without eating. No one should go without eating." Alex replied firmly. "Not you." She took a bite, chewing slowly. Alex watched her, a mixture of relief and guilt settling in his chest. He had done what he could, but the truth was, they both knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for long. The sounds of the city continued to swirl around them, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were invisible. It was as if they were part of the backdrop, overlooked by everyone around them. As Layla finished the food, she set the paper napkin aside and looked up at him. "Do you think things will ever get better?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Alex hesitated, the weight of the question sinking into him. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that they'd find a way out of this. But deep down, he knew how hard it would be. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll keep going. We'll find a way." There was a long pause, and then Layla gave a small, hopeful smile. "I believe you." And in that moment, Alex realized that he didn't just have to keep going for himself. He had to keep going for Layla, for both of them, no matter how hard it got. As they sat together in silence, the noise of the city fading into the background, Alex couldn't help but feel a flicker of something hope, maybe, or just the will to survive. Whatever it was enough to keep them moving forward. The day dragged on, an endless stream of noise and people. Alex tried to ignore the exhaustion that weighed on him, pushing it down as best as he could. Layla had fallen asleep again beside him, her head resting against his shoulder, the soft rise and fall of her chest the only sign that she was still breathing. The food from earlier had given her a little energy, but the fatigue was overwhelming. He couldn't blame her for needing rest, but for him, rest had become a luxury he couldn't afford. The cold, the hunger, and the ever-present threat of the unknown, it all gnawed at him, draining his strength, making him anxious. He constantly scanned the streets, his eyes darting from one face to the next, watching for danger. He had learned the hard way that trusting people could be deadly. There was a loud honking of a horn nearby, followed by the screech of brakes. Alex stiffened, his heart jumping. Layla stirred beside him, blinking sleepily. "What's going on?" she mumbled. "Nothing. Just stay close," Alex said, trying to sound calm, but the tension in his voice gave him away. He couldn't let his guard down. Not here. Not now. A couple of men passed by, laughing loudly, their hands in their pockets, their steps unsteady. Alex could smell the alcohol on their breath even from where he was sitting. He hoped they wouldn't notice them, but it wasn't a guarantee. He pressed his back against the cold, graffiti-covered wall, hoping to stay out of sight. He had learned how to blend in over the years, to make himself small, to disappear in plain sight. The streets taught him that, but that didn't stop the fear from gnawing at him every time someone came too close. The fear that one day someone wouldn't look away, and that would be the end. Layla tugged at his sleeve, breaking his thoughts. "Alex, I'm scared." He turned to look at her, his heart breaking at the vulnerability in her eyes. She was just a kid, caught in a world that didn't care about her. He couldn't blame her for feeling that way. He felt it too. "I know," he said quietly, "but we've got each other. We'll be okay." He wanted to believe it. He needed to believe it. But the reality of the streets was much harsher than any promise he could make. A car pulled up near them, its engine idling, its headlights flashing in their direction. Alex's chest tightened. He immediately grabbed Layla's hand, pulling her closer to him. The car window rolled down, and a woman's face appeared, her expression tense. "You kids need a ride?" she asked, her voice sounding strange, almost forced. She glanced nervously at the street, as if looking over her shoulder. Alex felt a wave of caution flood his veins. This wasn't normal. People didn't offer rides to strangers on the street. "No thanks," he said quickly, pulling Layla back a few steps. He wasn't about to make the same mistake he had seen others make. He had heard too many stories about kids getting into cars, never to be seen again. The woman's face faltered, her eyes narrowing as if she were sizing them up. There was a moment of tension before she sighed, rolling the window back up. The car drove off, disappearing into the crowd. Layla looked up at Alex, her expression confused. "Why didn't we go with her? She looked nice." Alex bit his lip. "Not everyone is nice, Layla. You have to be careful who you trust." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't argue. She didn't need to understand it all yet. She just needed to survive. The day passed slowly, with the noise of the city growing louder as the sun dipped lower in the sky. They moved from spot to spot, searching for shelter, searching for safety. Alex had learned that staying in one place too long attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. When night fell, the streets grew colder, the sounds more ominous. The world seemed to shrink around them as the darkness took over. Alex found a doorway that offered a small amount of shelter from the wind, and he and Layla huddled together, hoping for a few hours of rest. But sleep never came easily. Every sound, every footstep made Alex tense. The darkness felt heavier here, more oppressive. There was no telling what might happen. Layla shifted beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Alex, what if we never get out of here? What if this is it?" He swallowed, the words catching in his throat. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that they would find a way out, that they would be safe. But even he wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know, Layla," he admitted, his voice raw. "But we're together. That's all that matters." Layla looked up at him, her eyes full of uncertainty, but also trust. She wrapped her arms around him, her small body pressing against his for warmth. For a moment, there was peace, a fragile kind of peace. And in that fleeting moment, Alex felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the will to keep fighting. But whatever it was enough to keep him going, if only for one more night. As the world around them grew darker, Alex closed his eyes and let himself drift into a light sleep, his mind still alert, always waiting for the next challenge, the next fear. Tomorrow would come, and with it, they would face whatever it had in store. The morning came too soon, the harsh light of the sun creeping into the cracks of the alleyway. Alex woke first, as always, his eyes snapping open the moment his body stirred. The streets were already alive, the sounds of traffic and people moving about like a clockwork machine. Layla was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful, though her body shivered slightly from the cold that never seemed to leave. He had to get up. There was no time to rest, not when survival was the only goal. He gently shook Layla, careful not to startle her. "Layla, wake up. We have to go." Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused for a moment before she saw him. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "Nothing's wrong," Alex lied, forcing a smile. "We just need to move. It's getting late." Layla nodded, sitting up slowly, her small body still weary from days of barely sleeping. She stretched, yawning, and Alex could see the dark circles under her eyes, reminders of the days they had spent on the streets. They both stood up, collecting the few things they had: a worn backpack, some broken shoes, and the little bit of food Alex had managed to steal from a dumpster the night before. They didn't have much, but it was something, at least for today. Alex checked the street before leading Layla out into the morning chaos. They moved quickly, trying to stay out of sight. The city was already bustling, people walking quickly, cars honking, the usual noise that never seemed to stop. Alex hated it. He hated how the world continued on, oblivious to the struggles of those who had no place in it. They walked aimlessly, heading toward the park they had found a few days ago. It was one of the few places that felt safe, tucked away in the corner of the city, away from the dangers that lurked on every corner. It wasn't much, but it was a place. They could sit for a while, catch their breath, and maybe get a little rest. But as they approached the park, Alex felt his stomach twist with unease. A group of teenagers hung around the entrance, laughing, their voices loud and reckless. They didn't look like the kind of people you could trust. Alex tried to steer Layla toward the other side of the street, but they were spotted before they could move. "Hey, look at this," one of the teens called out, his voice full of mockery. "A couple of strays. What are you two doing here?" Alex's heart raced. He could feel the tension building, the fear in his chest rising. He didn't want trouble. Not today, not when they had so little left. "We're just passing through," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're not bothering anyone." The teen stepped closer, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Passing through? You sure about that?" He glanced back at his friends, who were laughing now, clearly enjoying the situation. Alex stood his ground, but inside, his mind was spinning. He couldn't let these kids intimidate them. He couldn't let Layla see him back down. One of the other teens stepped forward, a girl with messy hair and an angry look in her eyes. "You don't belong here. Why don't you go back to wherever you came from?" Layla shrank back behind Alex, clutching his sleeve. Alex's protective instincts kicked in, and he stepped in front of her, facing the group. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his voice shaking slightly despite his efforts to remain calm. The group paused for a moment, sizing him up, before the first teen spoke again. "You'll be fine as long as you stay out of our way. Got it?" Alex nodded, his pulse still racing, but he didn't take his eyes off them until the group finally turned and walked away, their laughter fading as they moved down the street. When they were out of sight, Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Layla pressed against him, her hand still clutching his sleeve. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Alex nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was lying to her or to himself. "We're fine," but the truth was, Alex knew they had just narrowly escaped something much worse. The streets were full of threats, both seen and unseen, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shield Layla from all of it. They continued toward the park, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in, always lurking just around the corner. He had learned that the hard way, time and time again. Once they finally reached the park, Alex scanned the area, looking for a place to sit. It was quieter here, but even the peace seemed temporary. They sat on a worn bench, the metal cold beneath them, and Alex stared at the ground, his thoughts racing. "We'll be okay, right?" Layla asked again, her voice small. Alex took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. He wanted to tell her everything would be fine, that they would find a way out of this nightmare. But as he looked at her, he knew that the truth was more complicated than that. "I don't know," he said quietly, the words hanging heavy between them. "But I'm not going to stop trying." He looked up, forcing a smile. "We have each other. That's enough." Layla returned his smile, though it was small and uncertain. But it was something, and for now, that would have to be enough. The day continued, a blur of movement and noise, but Alex's mind remained fixed on one thing: keeping them safe. And even if he didn't know how, he promised himself that he would find a way, no matter what it took. The day wore on, the sun dipping low in the sky as Alex and Layla moved through the streets. The park was behind them now, and they were walking aimlessly again, searching for a place to rest, a safe corner where they could stop, where they wouldn't attract attention. The streets felt colder with every passing minute, the air thick with the scent of grease and exhaust. People rushed by them, heads down, too busy to notice the two kids walking in silence, trying to blend into the background. Alex tried to ignore the pang in his stomach, the gnawing hunger that never went away, but the hunger inside wasn't just for food. It was the hunger for something more, something he couldn't even name. They walked past a small convenience store, and Alex paused, his eyes darting to the window where an elderly woman was sorting through cans on a shelf. His stomach twisted again. The thought of a warm meal seemed so far out of reach, a dream that would remain just that, a dream. "We should keep moving," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the bitterness was hard to hide. Layla didn't respond, but he could tell she was thinking the same thing. The reality of their situation had begun to settle in deeper. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about trying to hold onto the small bits of hope they had left. They turned a corner, stepping onto a quieter street lined with older buildings. The day was nearly over now, the shadows long and stretching across the pavement. They found a bench in a small square, its metal frame cold to the touch, but it was the only option. They had no other choice. Alex sat first, pulling Layla down beside him. She leaned against him, tired but trying to stay alert. Alex could feel the exhaustion weighing on her, the way her body slumped against his, but he knew she wouldn't complain. She never did. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Alex." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was scared, just like he was, but he didn't know how to ease her fear. He didn't know if there was even a way out for them anymore. "We'll be okay," he said, though the words felt hollow, even to him. "We have to be," but in that moment, he wasn't so sure. As they sat there, the sun dipping lower, a man appeared in front of them, his shadow falling over the bench. Alex looked up, instinctively moving Layla a little closer to him, his muscles tensing. The man was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. His expression was unreadable, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses that made him seem more like a figure out of a bad dream than a person. "You kids need anything?" The voice was low, almost too calm, as if he had seen it all before. Alex didn't speak immediately. His first instinct was to move, to get up and walk away. People like this didn't help kids like them. But something in the man's voice, something about the way he spoke, stopped him. Layla glanced up at the man, her eyes wide but curious. Alex gave her a subtle shake of his head, urging her not to say anything, not to trust him. "We don't need anything," Alex replied, his voice firm. He didn't trust this man, not even a little. The man stood there for a moment, his gaze lingering on them before he spoke again, quieter this time. "I don't mean to scare you, but you shouldn't be out here much longer. The streets aren't safe at night. People get desperate when the sun goes down." Alex clenched his jaw, wary. "We're fine," he said, standing up now, pulling Layla to her feet. But the man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled wad of cash. He tossed it onto the bench between them. "Take it. You're going to need it," the man said. His voice was different now, almost resigned. "But I'll give you one piece of advice. Trust no one, not even me. This place, it'll chew you up if you let it." Alex stared at the money for a long moment, torn between taking it and walking away. He didn't want to owe anything to anyone, especially not someone like this. But Layla's soft voice cut through his thoughts. "Maybe we should take it," she said, her eyes still on the money. "Maybe it'll help us." Alex hesitated, then slowly reached for the cash, shoving it into his pocket without a word. He wasn't sure what the man's game was, but for now, he had no choice but to take it. Without another word, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing darkness. His footsteps echoed in the street, and Alex couldn't help but feel uneasy. He had no idea who that man was or what he wanted, but something about the whole encounter left a pit in his stomach. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Layla asked, her voice uncertain. Alex didn't have an answer for her. All he knew was that the streets weren't safe. They hadn't been safe for a long time. "We'll figure it out," he said, more to himself than to her. "We always do." As the night crept in, the chill in the air felt heavier, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Alex sat back down on the bench, Layla curling up beside him for warmth. They didn't speak, both of them lost in their thoughts, wondering what the next day would bring. Alex kept the money in his pocket, unsure of when or how he would use it. But for the first time in a long while, the idea of having something, even if it was small, felt like a lifeline. But deep down, Alex knew that no amount of money would change the fact that they were still alone. They had to keep moving, keep surviving. The streets weren't just dangerous because of people like the man who had helped them. They were dangerous because of the feeling of hopelessness that always loomed, ready to swallow them whole. And no matter what he told Layla, Alex wasn't sure if they would make it out, but he would try. He would always try. The night was suffocating. The darkness felt thicker, like a blanket wrapped too tight round their shoulders. Alex lay awake on the bench, his mind spinning, his body exhausted but restless. Layla had fallen asleep next to him, her head resting on his arm, her breathing steady, though the sharp rise and fall of her chest still betrayed the weight of the days spent on the streets. The cold of the night had seeped into his bones, and his thoughts drifted back to before everything changed. Back to a time when he hadn't had to worry about where his next meal would come from, when the streets didn't feel like a relentless enemy. Alex shut his eyes and let himself think back to those memories, though they were growing harder to recall. It felt like years ago, even though it had only been months. He could still remember the warmth of his mother's voice, the way she used to laugh as she braided his hair, the way she'd promised that things would be better. He remembered the sound of his father's deep voice as he sat at the kitchen table, the light filtering in through the small window. But those memories always came with a sting. They were fleeting, like the soft scent of something lost forever. He had been a kid then, just a boy, living in a small apartment with a small family, dreaming about a future that seemed so simple. But everything had unraveled when they left him behind. His mind flashed back to that night. He was 8 years old, alone in his room when the shouting started. The door slammed open, and his mother was there, tears in her eyes, her voice pleading. She said they were leaving. They couldn't do this anymore. She took his hand, pulled him from his bed, but before he could say anything, they were gone. His father had stayed behind, silent, staring at the ground, his back turned. Alex had never understood it. They just left. They didn't even say goodbye. And that's when the streets had started to feel like home. The cold reality of the present brought him back. He glanced down at Layla, her small form curled up against him, seeking warmth in the cold night. She was too young to have a past like his, too young to carry the weight of abandonment. Yet, in so many ways, her story mirrored his. Layla had lost everything too. Her parents had abandoned her, and just like him, she had learned to trust the streets more than the world she was born into. But even in the depths of despair, there had been something in her that reminded him of who he used to be, someone with a dream, a hope that despite all the darkness, there was still something to live for. Layla stirred slightly, shifting in her sleep, and Alex found himself reaching for her hand, squeezing it softly. He couldn't protect her from the world, not all of it, but he would protect her from the cold and the hunger, from the dangers that lurked in every shadow. As the hours passed, Alex drifted in and out of a restless sleep, his mind never fully at ease. Every noise from the street made him jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. The morning light came slowly, dragging itself into the world like it didn't want to be seen. Alex blinked into the weak sunlight, his body stiff from the cold bench, but his mind still clouded with thoughts of what the next day would bring. Layla woke up next, her face crinkling with confusion as she sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Is it morning already?" she asked in a soft voice. "Yeah," Alex said, his throat dry. He hadn't even realized how much time had passed. They both stood, stretching, the weight of the streets pressing down on them once more. Layla looked up at him, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something that made Alex pause, his heart skipping a beat. "Alex, do you think we'll find a place where we can stay? Like somewhere safe?" Her words were small, but they carried more weight than anything else she had said before. Alex's chest tightened, and he wanted so badly to promise her that they would, but the truth was, he didn't know. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice hoarse. He paused, taking a deep breath. "But I'll keep looking. I'll find us a way." Layla nodded, though her eyes were clouded with uncertainty. Alex didn't blame her. He was scared too, though he would never admit it. They moved through the streets again, trying to keep to the quieter parts of the city, staying out of the way. Every corner they turned, Alex felt the pressure mounting, the pressure of time running out, but he pushed it down, focusing instead on each step forward. He couldn't afford to think too much about tomorrow. Not today. They passed the same convenience store from the day before, and Alex's stomach twisted at the thought of food, but there was no way to get it, no way to ask for help. Not yet. Instead, they moved along, searching for some sign, some place that could offer them a glimmer of hope. But everywhere they went, the world felt more closed off, more indifferent to their struggle. At the edge of the street, Alex caught sight of something, a small church, its doors slightly ajar, the sound of soft music drifting out into the street. His heart leaped. Churches had always been a safe place, a place where people looked out for each other. "Layla, wait," he said, grabbing her hand and pulling her gently toward the church. "Let's go see if they can help us." As they approached the door, Alex felt a flicker of hope rise inside him. Maybe this would be the place. Maybe this would be the break they needed. But as they stepped inside, the cold reality of the world outside didn't disappear. The church was empty, except for a few people sitting in the pews, heads bowed in quiet prayer. A woman near the front stood up as they entered, her eyes landing on them with a look of both surprise and pity. "You too should be careful," she said, her voice soft but firm. "There's not much here for children like you." The words were a slap in the face, but Alex didn't back down. "Not now, not after everything. We're just looking for help," he said quietly. The woman studied them for a moment, her gaze softening. "I'll see what I can do. Come sit." And for the first time in a long while, Alex felt like maybe, just maybe, someone might finally see them. The woman led Alex and Layla to the back of the church, where a small table was set up with cans of food and a few blankets. It wasn't much, but to Alex, it felt like a luxury. The warmth of the place was a stark contrast to the biting cold of the streets. The soft hum of the music in the background seemed to lift a weight off his chest, if only for a moment. "Thank you," Alex said quietly, though a sense of wariness still lingered in his chest. He had learned to never fully trust anyone who offered help. People could easily disappoint, but there was something in the woman's eyes, a kindness, however fleeting, that made him hesitate. She smiled gently, her face lined with age and wisdom. No child should be out there on their own. The world can be harsh, but there's still good in it. You just have to find it. Layla, who had been silent the entire time, looked up at the woman with wide eyes. "Do you really think there's good in the world?" The woman's expression softened. "I know there is. You just have to hold on, especially when things seem dark." The simplicity of the woman's words hit Alex harder than he expected. He wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that things could get better, that there was still a way out of this. But the reality of their situation weighed too heavily on his heart. "Is there a place where we can stay?" Alex asked, his voice cautious. The woman paused before answering, her gaze searching his face. "There's a shelter a few blocks away. It's not perfect, but it's a roof over your head and a warm meal." Alex felt a flicker of hope spark within him. A shelter. The thought of finally having a bed to sleep in, even if it was temporary, seemed like a dream he had almost forgotten. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was the first real help they had gotten in a long time. The woman handed them each a blanket and a can of soup. "I wish I could do more, but for now, this is what I can offer. Be careful out there." As they stepped back into the cold, Layla held onto the blanket tightly, the fabric providing a small comfort. The promise of the shelter ahead gave them both a sense of direction, something they had lacked for so long. "I can't believe we're finally going to sleep inside," Layla whispered, a hint of excitement in her voice. Alex smiled, though it was bittersweet. He didn't want to get his hopes up. He knew the streets could be unforgiving, and even a shelter wasn't a guarantee of safety. But for tonight, it was something. They made their way to the shelter, the streets still bustling around them. People passed by without a second glance, their lives moving forward as if the two kids on the corner didn't matter. But to Alex and Layla, it felt like a small victory. The shelter was a modest building with a faded sign above the door. Inside, the warmth hit them like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Alex felt his body relax. There was a volunteer behind the counter, a woman who smiled at them with a look of recognition. "You must be the kids the church sent over," she said kindly. "We have a few beds left for the night." Alex nodded, too exhausted to speak, but grateful beyond words. Layla's hand tightened in his, her fingers warm against his cold ones. It felt like a luxury, even if it was temporary. They would take what they could. As they were led to a small dormitory room, Layla spoke up, her voice soft. "Do you think we'll be okay here, Alex?" He paused, looking around the room. There were a few other kids, tucked into beds, all quiet and still, some of them older than him, some younger. It was nothing like home, but it was a place where they could rest. "I don't know," he said, the weight of his words heavy, "but we're here. And that's enough for tonight." Layla curled into the bed beside him, pulling the blanket tightly around her. Alex sat up for a moment, staring out the small window, the faint city lights flickering in the distance. For the first time in what felt like a long time, he allowed himself to close his eyes and drift off to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, and new decisions. But for now, they had made it through one more night, and that was something worth holding on to. The sun rose slowly the next morning, its light spilling weakly through the small window in the shelter. Alex woke to the sounds of other children stirring, their voices low, but filled with the quiet sense of belonging that he envied. Layla was still asleep beside him, her small face peaceful for once, the worries of the streets momentarily forgotten. For a moment, Alex simply watched her, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on him. They had survived another night. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had dared hope for the past few weeks. He stretched carefully, trying not to disturb Layla, and quietly slipped out of bed. The shelter was relatively quiet, the volunteers moving about with practiced ease, serving breakfast and making sure the kids were safe. It was a small sense of normalcy, something that had felt so out of reach. As he made his way to the small kitchen, Alex took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs warm and comforting. There were a few other kids sitting around the table, their faces weary but hopeful, just like him. He could feel the difference already, the sense of being part of something, even if only for a short while. The volunteer behind the counter gave him a warm smile as she handed him a bowl of oatmeal. "Here you go, sweetheart. You're looking better today." Alex nodded, grateful for the kindness, but he couldn't let himself get too comfortable. He had learned long ago not to trust comfort. The world outside this shelter was still unforgiving, and no amount of food or warmth could change that. He sat down at an empty table, his mind still racing. Layla would wake soon, and they would have to figure out what came next. The shelter wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a lifeline, a temporary refuge from the chaos of the streets. As he ate, he tried to push away the nagging feeling that things could change in an instant, that nothing was guaranteed. There were still so many questions unanswered, so many dangers lurking just out of sight. But for now, he would focus on what he could control. He would keep Layla safe, at least for today. When Layla woke up, she was groggy, but the moment she saw the breakfast laid out, her eyes lit up. "Is that food? Really?" Alex smiled and nodded. "Yeah, really. It's not much, but it's better than anything we've had in a while." She scrambled out of bed, her excitement infectious. For a moment, she looked like a normal kid again, free from the weight of the world, if only for a few hours. As they sat together, eating, Alex allowed himself a moment of peace. The sound of other kids talking, the clink of spoons against bowls, the sense of being in a place that cared, this was more than he had thought possible. And though he knew the streets were never far behind, he allowed himself to believe, if only for a brief moment, that maybe this could be a new beginning for them. "Do you think we can stay here for long?" Layla asked, her voice small but hopeful. Alex's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that they would find a way out of this nightmare. But the truth was, he didn't know. I don't know, he replied honestly, but we're safe here for now, and we're together. That's what matters. Layla looked at him, her eyes filled with that same quiet trust she always seemed to have in him, even when he felt like he was failing her. For her sake, he had to keep going, even if he didn't have all the answers. As they finished their breakfast, a volunteer approached them, a kind woman with short blonde hair and soft eyes. Alex, Layla, she said, her voice gentle, there's a meeting later this afternoon. We're going to talk about options for getting you two into a more permanent place. It's not a guarantee, but it's a start. Alex nodded, a flicker of hope stirring inside him. A permanent place. It wasn't just a dream anymore. Maybe it could be their reality. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel so far away. The meeting that afternoon was held in a small room at the back of the shelter. The walls were plain, but the chairs were arranged in a circle, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Alex uneasy. He wasn't used to sitting down and talking about their future. He was used to surviving, to moving through the world without looking back. The room was filled with a handful of other kids, some younger than Alex, others older, all of them with stories written in their tired eyes. A counselor stood at the front, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He had a kind smile, but there was an underlying seriousness in the way he carried himself. Thank you all for joining me today, the counselor began. I know it's not easy to be here, to be in a place like this, but you are not alone. We're here to find a way to help you. Alex's mind drifted as the counselor continued talking, outlining different options for the kids in the shelter: foster homes, group homes, rehabilitation programs, and most importantly, legal aid for those who needed it. It was all foreign to Alex. The idea of having a place, a family, a future that wasn't shaped by the constant fight for survival. He didn't know how to feel about it. He didn't know if it was even something he could believe in. Layla was sitting next to him, her hands folded in her lap, her face thoughtful. She was taking in every word, every promise, while Alex couldn't help but wonder how long any of it would really last. He didn't want to get his hopes up, not after everything they'd been through. When the counselor spoke about foster homes, Alex felt his stomach twist. The thought of being placed somewhere with strangers was terrifying. What if they didn't want them? What if they were sent to separate homes? The idea of losing Layla after everything they had been through was unbearable. Layla seemed to sense his discomfort. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think we'll be okay, Alex? Will they let us stay together? Alex met her gaze, her wide eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that they wouldn't be separated, but he didn't know if that was the truth. I don't know, he said softly, but we're not giving up. Not ever. The counselor wrapped up the meeting, offering brochures with information about the next steps. He mentioned the legal process that would be involved, paperwork, and the waiting that might take place before any decisions were made. Alex couldn't stop thinking about how long it might take, how uncertain everything felt. As the group slowly dispersed, Alex and Layla lingered behind, standing together in the back of the room. Do you think we're ready for all of this? Layla asked, her voice quiet, but full of the weight of the question. Alex didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure they would ever be ready for what was coming, but one thing was certain: they couldn't do it alone. They had to trust in the process, in the people who were offering them help, even if that trust felt like a fragile thing. I don't know if we'll ever be ready, Alex said finally, but we'll take it one step at a time. We'll keep going, no matter what. Layla nodded, as if his words gave her some kind of reassurance. She took his hand, and for a moment, Alex felt the weight of the world shift just slightly. They weren't alone, not anymore. They had people on their side, and that meant something. That night, as they lay in their separate beds at the shelter, Alex found himself staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with everything that had happened in the past few days. The hope that had flickered inside him during the meeting now felt like a fragile thread easily snapped by the harsh realities of the world. But the thread was still there, and he couldn't ignore it. They had a chance now, a real one. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but it was a chance. Alex closed his eyes, the darkness of the night wrapping around him like an old, familiar blanket. For once, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel as heavy. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was willing to find out. Tomorrow would come, and they would face it together. The morning came too quickly, as it always did in the shelter. The quiet hum of the city outside filtered through the small, cracked windows, and Alex woke to the familiar sound of children getting ready for the day. Layla was still asleep beside him, her chest rising and falling gently under the thin blanket. For a moment, everything felt calm, peaceful, like the world outside could wait. But Alex knew it wouldn't. He quietly stood up, careful not to wake her, and made his way to the common room. The volunteers were already busy, preparing breakfast, offering warm smiles to the children as they trickled in, still groggy from sleep. Alex didn't feel like eating, not today. His stomach had grown used to hunger, and the pain of it had become a dull throb, something he could ignore for a while. Instead, he sat by the window, staring out at the world that seemed so far out of reach. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the street, and Alex felt the weight of the unknown pressing in on him. He had no idea what would happen next, no idea if any of this would work out. The shelter, the meeting, the promises of a new life, they all seemed like a distant dream. Layla joined him a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes and yawning. Her hair was tangled, but there was still a spark in her eyes, a kind of quiet hope that Alex both envied and feared. "Morning," she said, sitting next to him. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Alex muttered. It wasn't a lie. He hadn't slept well, his mind racing through all the possibilities, all the what-ifs. The counselor had said the process could take weeks, maybe months, and Alex wasn't sure they had that much time. "I'm nervous," Layla admitted softly, her voice small and vulnerable. "What if they don't let us stay together? What if they send us to different places?" The fear in her voice hit Alex hard. It was the same fear he had been carrying with him since they'd first ended up on the streets, the fear of losing her, of being alone again. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We won't let that happen. No matter what, we'll stay together." Layla looked at him, her expression hopeful, but the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "But what if? What if they can't help us? What if it doesn't work out?" Alex felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He couldn't promise her that everything would be okay. He couldn't even promise her that they'd make it out of this alive. But what he could promise was that he wouldn't stop fighting. Not for her, not for them. "We'll fight," he said, his voice firm. "We've made it this far. We'll keep going." She nodded, but Alex could see the fear in her eyes. He understood it because he felt it too. The fear of the unknown, the fear of what would happen when the world finally caught up to them. As the day went on, Alex tried to push those fears aside. He focused on the small tasks, the simple things that kept them grounded in the present, helping Layla with her breakfast, talking to a few of the other kids in the shelter, keeping his eyes open for any sign of opportunity. The days in the shelter were becoming routine, but there was still a gnawing sense of urgency, a feeling that things could change in an instant. When the afternoon came, Alex and Layla were called into another meeting with the counselor. The room was smaller this time, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Alex sat beside Layla, trying to keep his nerves in check. He could feel her hand shaking in his, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. The counselor looked at them both with a serious expression, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I know you've both been through a lot, and we're doing everything we can to make sure you're placed in a safe environment. But I need to be honest with you, there are no guarantees. The system is overcrowded, and there are a lot of kids in need of care. It's going to be a process, and it's going to take time." Alex's heart sank, the weight of those words settling like a stone in his chest. He knew things weren't going to be easy, but the reality of it hit him harder than he expected. The counselor continued, "We're doing what we can to expedite the process for you too, but it's going to be a battle. I want you to understand that things may not happen as quickly as we'd like." Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't let this break him. Not now. Layla looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. She was afraid and he could see that. He knew it wasn't just fear of being separated. It was the fear of never finding safety, of never having a place where they truly belong. "We'll figure it out," Alex said, his voice softer this time, but still filled with determination. "We always do," the counselor nodded, though there was a trace of doubt in his expression. "I hope you're right. Just know that we're here for you, and we'll support you through this." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, the words sinking in but not truly settling. The uncertainty hung in the air, thick and suffocating. When they finally left the room, Layla stayed close to Alex, her small hand tucked tightly in his. They walked back to the common area, the sounds of other children filling the space around them. It felt like life was moving around them, but they were still stuck, waiting for something to change. As they sat down on a bench, Alex could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. They were fighting for a chance, but the path ahead was anything but clear. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding their lives from the ground up, and that was a battle Alex wasn't sure they were ready for. But he couldn't stop now, not when Layla was depending on him. "We'll keep going," Alex whispered to her, more to reassure himself than her. One day at a time, Layla nodded, her gaze distant. For the first time, Alex wondered if she believed him or if she was just trying to hold on to whatever hope she could. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, but for tonight, they had each other, and that had to be enough. The days blurred together in the shelter. Each morning felt like a repeat of the last, eating breakfast, attending meetings, talking with the other kids, and trying to find something that felt like normalcy. But it never quite reached that point. Every conversation, every interaction carried a weight of uncertainty that neither Alex nor Layla could shake. Alex couldn't help but notice the others. Some were younger, some older, all of them carrying their own stories, their own burden. He had seen some of them smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach the eyes. There was something hollow about it. The shelter wasn't a home. It was a temporary solution, a stopgap between the streets and whatever came next. And everyone there knew it. Layla had grown quieter since the last meeting. She asked fewer questions, spent more time sitting by herself, and didn't look as hopeful as she once had. The fear of the unknown had taken root in her, just as it had in Alex. The system they were depending on, this fragile thread of hope, was something neither of them could fully trust. Today, Alex noticed that Layla was staring out the window again, her face blank, eyes distant. He sat beside her, pulling his knees up to his chest, the cold concrete floor pressing against his skin. "Layla," he said, softly, trying to break her out of her thoughts. She looked at him, blinking, as if waking from a dream. What's on your mind?" he asked. He knew something was bothering her, but she hadn't been open about it in days. She hesitated for a long moment before answering, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think it'll ever feel like we belong anywhere?" The question hit Alex harder than he expected. It wasn't just about finding a home. It was about belonging, about feeling like they were part of something real. The streets had never let him feel like that. The shelter, though safer, still didn't feel like home. He wasn't sure where it would come from, or if it would ever come at all. "I don't know," he said truthfully, rubbing the back of his neck. "But we have to keep looking. We have to keep going until we find it." She nodded slowly, but didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say. The uncertainty hung between them like a cloud. That night, after they had eaten the small meal provided by the shelter, Alex found himself restless again. He couldn't sleep, his mind spinning with worries about what the next day would bring. Layla was already asleep beside him, but even in the stillness of the room, Alex felt the tension of the world pressing in on him. He got up quietly, not wanting to disturb her, and moved to the corner of the room. There, he sat against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise of the other children in the shelter, trying to find some peace within himself. The memories came then, the ones he didn't let himself think about during the day. His parents, his old life. He remembered the way his mother used to hold him, the softness of her voice when she'd sing lullabies, the smell of her perfume that always lingered in the air. He remembered his father's deep laugh, the way he would tell stories at the dinner table, the way everything seemed so simple, so easy, and then everything changed. his mother leaving, his father staying silent, never saying goodbye. And just like that, the world Alex had known was shattered. The streets became his home, the only place where he could find a semblance of control. But it wasn't really control, was it? It was survival, barely holding on. And now, in the shelter, he could feel the same emptiness he had felt back then creeping back in. The door creaked open, and Alex looked up, startled. The counselor, a man with graying hair and a tired but kind expression, stepped into the room. "Alex," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Alex nodded, his throat tight. He hadn't expected anyone to come looking for him. The counselor sat down beside him, his eyes gentle. "I know things aren't easy right now. You're both in a difficult situation, and it's going to take time. But I need you to know that we're doing everything we can to help you." "I know," Alex said, his voice strained. It feels like nothing ever really changes." The counselor looked at him thoughtfully. "Change takes time, Alex. And sometimes it feels like we're stuck, but you're not stuck. You have a future ahead of you, and we're working to make sure it's a better one. But you have to trust that the process is going to take time." Alex couldn't bring himself to respond. He didn't want to hear about time anymore. He had heard it all before. But the counselor's presence was calming, even if the words were just another form of reassurance. "Layla's been quiet lately," the counselor continued, his voice soft. "I know she's been worried. I need you to keep talking to her. Keep reminding her that you're both in this together." Alex's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about it much, but the weight of his responsibility for Layla had always been there, growing heavier each day. He had promised her they would stick together, that they wouldn't give up. But sometimes even he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. "I'm trying," Alex said, his voice raw. "But I don't know what to say anymore." The counselor nodded. "You don't have to have all the answers. Just remind her that you're there. And don't forget that you're allowed to feel scared too. It's okay to not have it all figured out." The words hit Alex harder than he expected. For so long, he had kept his fears buried, thinking they would make him weak, thinking that if he showed any vulnerability, it would break them both. But hearing it from someone else, someone who understood, made him realize how much he had been carrying on his own. "You're doing the best you can," the counselor said gently, "and that's all you can do. Keep going, one day at a time." Alex sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. The counselor stood up, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder before walking out. Alex stayed there for a while longer, the quiet of the night settling around him. Tomorrow would come. There was no way to know what it would bring, but for tonight, Alex let himself believe that there was still a chance for something better. And that, for now, was enough. The days that followed felt like they were stitched together with fragile threads, each day passing with a weighty sense of uncertainty. Alex kept to himself more than usual, quietly grappling with the promise he'd made to Layla, the promise to protect her, to help them both survive in a world that had long since turned its back on them. But every time he looked at her, he saw the cracks forming, the slow, invisible fractures in their trust, in their sense of safety. It was the little things that chipped away at the illusion of security. The quiet conversations the other kids had, the way they gathered in small groups, speaking in whispers about the families they had once had, the lives they had lost. Alex could see how Layla watched them, her eyes full of longing, as if hoping that one day she could be part of something again. But Alex didn't know how to give her that. How could he when he had nothing to offer? Today was no different. They had spent the morning in the common area, sitting quietly as the other children played or spoke with volunteers. Layla had been sketching in her notebook, a habit she had picked up during the long nights in the shelter. Alex watched her for a moment, the faintest smile crossing his face. It was one of the few things that still gave her comfort, drawing the world as she imagined it, not as it was. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, unable to keep the worry from his voice. It had been a few days since they had spoken about her fears, but he could tell something still lingered there, just beneath the surface. Layla didn't look up right away. She took a deep breath, then slowly closed the notebook and placed it in her lap. "I don't know anymore, Alex." The words hung heavy between them, like a question neither of them had the answer to. Alex shifted, his fingers twitching with the urge to say something reassuring, but the truth was, he didn't know how to make everything better. He didn't know how to fix their broken world. I keep wondering, Layla continued, her voice soft but sharp with the edge of vulnerability. What if we never find a real home? What if this is all we'll ever have? Alex clenched his jaw, trying to push down the rising panic in his chest. The fear he had been carrying for so long seemed to grow every time Layla voiced her doubts. We'll find a way, I promise, he said, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. He was tired of making promises he couldn't be sure he could keep, but he couldn't let her see that. He couldn't let her see how terrified he was that they might not make it out of the shelter, out of the streets, out of the darkness that seemed to always follow them. Layla met his gaze, her eyes wide, her expression full of something Alex couldn't quite name. It was a look he hadn't seen before, and it made his stomach twist. With a feeling he couldn't shake. Do you trust them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The people here? The ones trying to help us? Alex's heart skipped a beat. The question hit him hard. Did he trust them? The volunteers? The counselors? The system that had promised to give them a chance? Could he trust any of it? Or was it all just a cruel illusion, a way to keep them from giving up, while the world continued to turn its back? I don't know, Alex admitted, his voice trembling slightly. I want to believe that they're trying to help, but it's hard to trust anyone. We've been let down so many times before, you know. Layla's expression softened, and she gave a small, almost sad smile. I know. I guess I just don't want to believe it's all a lie. I want to think that there's still something good in the world, even if it's hard to see. Alex looked down, feeling the weight of his own doubts pressing against him. She was right. He wanted to believe in something, too. But after everything they'd been through, it felt impossible to put his faith in something he couldn't control. Before he could respond, the door to the common room opened, and the counselor stepped in. He was carrying a folder, his face lined with the stress of the past few weeks. His eyes found Alex and Layla, and he walked over to them, his step slow. Alex, Layla, he said, his tone careful. I have some news. We've made some progress. There's a foster family that's been approved, and they're willing to take you both in, if you're ready. The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing that they were actually going to be placed somewhere else was harder than he had imagined. A foster family. It should have been a relief, a step toward a better future, but instead, it felt like another betrayal, another chapter in a life that was not his own. Layla looked up at the counselor, her eyes wide. A family? You mean we're going to live with them? The counselor nodded. They've been through the process. They're good people, and they've been cleared to take both of you in. It's not a perfect situation, but it's a chance for something better. A chance for stability, for a home. Alex could see the hope flicker in Layla's eyes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had heard the stories, seen the kids who were taken in by families who didn't care, who saw them as nothing more than burden. What if this family wasn't what it seemed? What if it was just another empty promise? We don't have to go, do we? Layla's voice was small, uncertain. The counselor's gaze softened, and he sighed. It's up to you. You can stay here if you want, but I think it's a good opportunity. You'd have a home, a real chance to start over. Alex looked at Layla, his heart torn. The idea of a family, of having a place where they could finally belong, was tempting, but he couldn't shake the fear that it might not be as good as it sounded. What if this was just another system designed to break them, another place where they didn't belong? We'll think about it, Alex said, his voice steady, though his insides were anything but. The counselor nodded, his expression unreadable. Take your time. I'm here if you need to talk. As he left the room, Alex turned to Layla, his thoughts spinning. The future was suddenly so close, so real, but it felt like walking into a fog. The road ahead was unclear, and every decision they made seemed to carry the weight of the world. I don't know what to do, Alex whispered, his voice breaking as the fear he had been holding inside bubbled to the surface. Layla's hand found his, her grip tight and comforting. We'll figure it out, Alex. We always do. Alex nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at him. Whatever they decided, the truth was clear. Nothing in the world would ever be easy again. But for Layla, he would keep going, even if he had no idea where that path would lead. The days seemed to stretch on longer now, the uncertainty pressing heavier with each passing hour. After the counselor's visit, Alex and Layla had spent a lot of time alone in the common room, each lost in their thoughts. They were both grappling with the decision that lay before them, the foster family. Could they trust them? Could they trust the system? Alex hadn't been able to shake the nagging doubts in his mind. The idea of being taken in by a family, after everything they'd been through, felt like a cruel twist of fate. What if it didn't work out? What if they ended up just as alone as before? His mind raced with all the possible scenarios, the good, the bad, and the in-between. Layla had been quieter than usual. She still held on to the hope that a family might be the answer, but Alex could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that kept him awake at night. It wasn't just about leaving the shelter. It was about leaving behind everything they had known, even if that was nothing more than survival on the streets. The morning sun streamed through the small window of the shelter's common room, casting a pale light on the worn furniture. Layla sat by the window, looking out at the street below, her arms wrapped around her knees. Alex walked over to her, sitting down beside her quietly. "We need to talk," he said softly. Layla turned to look at him, her face guarded. "About the family?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, we need to decide what we're going to do." There was a long pause. Layla didn't say anything right away. She just stared out the window, her fingers playing with the hem of her sleeve. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but steady. "Do you think we'll be okay, Alex, if we go with them?" Alex swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you, Layla. I wish I could say everything's going to be perfect and that we'll have a real home. But I can't promise that." She looked down at her hands, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to be alone again." The words hit Alex like a punch in the stomach. She didn't have to say it for him to understand. The abandonment, the loneliness, it was all too much. She had already lost so much that Alex couldn't even begin to comprehend. "We won't be alone," Alex said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty. "Not if we're together. We'll figure it out. We'll make it work." Layla met his gaze then, her eyes filled with that same hope, the same trust that she had always had in him, even when everything else had crumbled. "I believe you," she whispered. Alex's heart clenched. She shouldn't have to believe in him like that, not when he didn't know what to do, not when he was just as scared as she was. But he couldn't show her that fear. He couldn't let her see how lost he felt. "Maybe this is the best chance we have," Alex said, his words slow and deliberate. "A real home. It might not be perfect, but it's better than what we've had. A family that cares. We owe it to ourselves to give it a shot." Layla nodded slowly, though the doubt in her eyes still lingered. She was trying to believe him, just like she always did. But it wasn't easy. Nothing was ever easy. The counselor had given them some time to think, but the clock was ticking. They had to decide whether or not to take the chance with the foster family. It was a decision that felt too big, too heavy for two kids who had already seen more than their fair share of hardship. That afternoon, they sat in the small office with the counselor again. He smiled warmly at them, but Alex could see the tiredness in his eyes. He had been working hard to get them into a safe place, but even he couldn't guarantee what lay ahead. "I know it's a lot to process," the counselor said gently, "but I need to know if you've made a decision. The family is still willing to take you both in, and we can start the process as soon as you're ready." Alex and Layla exchanged a look, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. They had been here before, making choices that felt too big for them, too important to get wrong. But this time, it felt different. They weren't just choosing survival, they were choosing what came next, what kind of life they wanted. "We'll go," Alex said, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "We'll go with the family." The counselor nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I think it's a good choice. You two deserve a chance at something better." Layla's hand found Alex's again, her grip tight, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. The decision was made, and for the first time in a long while, Alex felt like he could breathe again. They were taking a step into the unknown, into something that could be better, something that could finally give them a sense of stability. But even as the counselor began to explain the next steps, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another beginning, another chapter in a story that wasn't over yet. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face. He knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let them face it alone. Tomorrow, they would leave the shelter. Tomorrow, they would meet the family that might change their lives forever. And though the future was still uncertain, Alex couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this was the chance they'd been waiting for. The day of their departure came faster than Alex had expected. It was a strange mix of excitement and fear, the unknown ahead of them, feeling like a weight pressing against his chest. The shelter had been their home for a while now, a place that had kept them safe, but not a home in the truest sense of the word. And now they were leaving it behind, stepping into a new life, or so the counselor and the volunteers promised. Alex stood by the door of the shelter, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He glanced over at Layla, who was clutching her small bag tightly, her wide eyes full of nervous anticipation. She had been quiet all morning, no longer asking questions or voicing her concern. It was as if she had accepted whatever came next, knowing it was beyond their control. "You ready?" Alex asked, his voice softer than usual. Layla didn't immediately respond. She stood still for a moment, looking around the shelter one last time. It wasn't much: cold walls, hard floors, the sounds of other children talking in the background, but for the past few weeks, it had been their world. It had been a place where they could at least feel safe, even if only for a short while. "I think so," Layla said finally, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She glanced up at him, her face softening. "Do you think they'll really be nice? The family?" Alex hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but they've been through all the right steps. They've been approved, and the counselor says they're good people." It was the truth, but it didn't make the knot in his stomach loosen. Even with all the reassurances, he knew better than to trust too easily. The world had shown them how quickly things could fall apart. They had learned to expect the worst, even when people said things would be different. "Let's just make sure we're okay," Alex said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "No matter what, we stick together." Layla nodded, her eyes brimming with a quiet resolve. It was more than trust, it was hope, something they hadn't felt in a long time. But hope was fragile, and Alex knew it was something they had to hold on to, even if it meant risking everything once again. The counselor appeared at the door, his face kind but serious. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice gentle. Alex nodded, his throat tight. Layla didn't say anything, but her small hand tightened around his once again. They followed the counselor out, down the familiar hallway of the shelter, and into the small van parked outside. The air was colder than usual, a reminder that the warmth of the shelter was now behind them. As they climbed into the van, Alex sat next to Layla, the silence between them almost suffocating. The streets they passed were busy, the city alive and moving, but everything felt distant, like they were leaving behind a part of themselves with each block they passed. They were heading into an unknown future, and the city they had once known so well now felt foreign, like a place they couldn't quite belong to anymore. When the van finally came to a stop, Alex took a deep breath. He could see the house ahead, a modest, two-story home with a well-kept yard. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it looked safe. It looked normal. For a moment, he felt a flicker of hope. This could be the chance they needed. The counselor turned to them, offering a small, reassuring smile. "This is it, the Johnsons. They're really excited to meet you both." Alex and Layla climbed out of the van, standing in front of the house. Alex looked at Layla, and for a moment, they just stood there, both unsure of what to do next. The weight of the decision was finally settling in, and he couldn't help but feel the sharp pang of fear and uncertainty. "You ready?" he asked her one more time, though he wasn't sure if he was asking her or himself. Layla took a deep breath and nodded. "I think so." They walked up to the front door together, their footsteps light but heavy at the same time. As they reached the door, it opened before they had a chance to knock. A woman in her mid-30s stood there, her face warm and welcoming, though there was a hint of nervousness in her smile. "Hello," she greeted them, her voice soft but kind. "I'm Sarah. It's so nice to meet you both." She stepped aside to let them in, and Alex hesitated before stepping over the threshold. This was it. This was the beginning of whatever came next. Inside, the house smelled of fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. The living room was cozy, with soft couches and pictures on the walls. There were toys scattered about, some on the floor, others on the shelves, evidence of a family that had lived here long before they arrived. "Come on in," Sarah said, her smile never faltering. "The kids are excited to meet you." Alex swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't the shelter anymore. This wasn't survival. This was something else, something he didn't know how to navigate. The house was quieter than the shelter, but somehow that only made it feel more foreign. The warmth, the normalcy, was something they hadn't known for so long. Alex's heart raced as he looked at Layla, wondering if this was the right decision after all. As they moved deeper into the house, a man in his 40s appeared from the kitchen, his face also friendly but a little nervous. "Hey there," he said, extending a hand to Alex first, then Layla. "I'm Mike. We're really glad you're here." The moment felt overwhelming. They were in a new place, with new faces, and for the first time in so long, it didn't feel like they were just surviving. It felt like they were trying to become something else, something more. But Alex wasn't sure he knew how to do that. Mike and Sarah led them into the dining room, where dinner was set at the table. There was a space for each of them, and everything seemed so normal. So much of it seemed too perfect to be real. But as the family began to talk, as they all sat together, Alex realized something. This was real. They weren't in a dream. This was their new life. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something other than fear, hope. A tiny flicker of it, but it was there. "Welcome to your new home," Sarah said, her voice warm and inviting. And for the first time in a long time, Alex allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found a place where they could belong. The days that followed felt both impossibly slow and incredibly fast. The transition to life with the Johnsons was not without its challenges, but something inside Alex shifted as he settled into his new life. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was a chance when they had never truly had before. The house was quiet at night, a stillness that Alex wasn't used to. No more sirens, no more fights, no more the constant hum of danger that had always surrounded them. It was strange, unsettling at first, but as the days passed, it became more of a comfort than a burden. Layla, too, seemed to be adjusting. She spent her mornings in the small yard, picking flowers and drawing with crayons at the kitchen table, her face light with the freedom of simply being a kid again. It made Alex's heart ache, seeing her like that, so full of hope, so full of the innocence she had once lost. It was a gift he didn't want to squander. One evening, after dinner, Sarah asked them to help clean up. The house felt lived in now, filled with voices and laughter, even if it was new to Alex. Layla eagerly joined Sarah in the kitchen, drying the dishes while Alex stayed in the living room, sitting on the couch, the weight of everything still hanging in the air. Mike came over to him, settling down on the other side of the couch. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but Mike seemed determined to change that. "How are you feeling about everything?" Mike asked, his voice calm but sincere. Alex hesitated. There was so much to say, but so little that felt safe to speak aloud. "I don't know," he admitted finally, running his hand through his hair. "It's still a lot to take in. Everything feels different. I mean, I've never had a place like this. A real place, you know." Mike nodded, a small understanding smile on his face. "I get it. It's a lot to adjust to, especially when you've been through what you have. But we're not asking you to forget where you've come from. You don't have to pretend like everything's perfect, but we want you to know that we're here. We're not going anywhere." The reassurance in Mike's words made something in Alex loosen, though a part of him still held back, still wary of the idea of completely trusting. Trust was something he had learned to guard fiercely, something he didn't offer lightly. "You really want us here?" Alex asked, his voice quiet, but with a hint of disbelief. "I mean, I'm not a perfect kid. We've had a rough past. I've done some things I'm not proud of." Mike chuckled softly, his expression warm. "Who hasn't? We're not looking for perfect. We're looking for people to share this home with. A family. That's all." Alex didn't know how to respond to that. His life had been filled with so many broken promises, so many people who had failed him, that the idea of a real family, one that actually cared, felt foreign. Mike stood up, patting Alex's shoulder as he did. "Take your time. We're here for you. Whenever you're ready, Later that night, after the house had quieted down, Alex found himself standing by the window, looking out at the street. The night was clear, and the stars above seemed brighter than they had ever been. He could hear the soft murmur of Sarah and Mike talking in the kitchen, their voices soothing in the way that people who truly cared for each other sounded. Layla came into the room, standing beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just looked out at the stars with, "I think I like it here," she said after a while, her voice soft. "It's peaceful." Alex didn't know what to say. A part of him wanted to tell her not to get too attached, not to trust too easily. But another part of him, the part that wanted something better for them both, wanted to believe in the peace she felt. He wanted to believe that this could be their home. He wanted to believe that they could finally have the life they had always dreamed of. "I think I like it here too," he said, his voice quieter than usual. They stood there in silence for a few more minutes, just taking in the quiet, the normalcy of it all. For the first time, Alex didn't feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. The streets were behind them. The battles they had fought to survive were behind them. And while he knew there would still be struggles ahead, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in a long time: hope. They weren't in the clear yet, not by a long shot. The scars of their past were still there, hidden deep inside them, reminders of the world they had left behind. But tonight, as they stood side by side in this new place, Alex couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had finally found a place where they belong, and that, he realized, was worth fighting for. Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.